Hi, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of Leap. Thank you so much for being here, and I hope you've had a great start to the new year. My guest today, I am very excited about. Michelle is doing a lot of amazing work in the grief and loss space. And so I bring to you today Michelle Gill, who is an author. She just recently wrote a memoir, and she is a speaker normalizing conversations about grief and loss, mental health advocacy, and disability awareness. Her debut memoir, Don't Tell Me to Get Over It, is coming out very, very soon. And we'll have a link to Michelle's website as well. Can you pre-order? Well, you can tell us in a minute if we can pre-order a copy of your book. When Michelle's not writing, she's cooking recipes from around the world and fangirling over the latest K-drama and reminding her two cats who think they're Egyptian gods that they've already been fed. So welcome, Michelle, to Leap. I want to start with just your memoir, though, because when I got on your website, The Grief Curator, it looks like a wonderful memoir. Can we pre-order that?
Not yet, but we will be having those links up soon.
So, okay, perfect.
The best way is to join the wait list, and then you'll know we will send out something when it's ready for pre-order.
Okay. When is it coming out?
We do not have a release date yet.
You don't have
We're still working on that.
Okay. All right. Great. Well, so welcome.
So good to be here. So honored. Thank you.
Well, I've been very excited about this conversation. So why don't you go ahead and you start and tell us the story. I know that you lost your father, and tell us what happened.
Yeah. So my father passed away in July of 2018, and he was 94. And I know what some of you are thinking. Well, he was 94. He lived his life. He lived a good life, a good long life. Wasn't it expected? And the answer is yes, it was expected. He'd been in and out of the hospital 6 months before. But I can tell you, it does not matter how long you have had someone. When they pass away, it is a shock. And I will never forget that day. And all the emotions and the experiences that I had, almost not to the hour, but after I got back from the hospital, we had them come and take him. I started journaling. Now, I've been a journaler since probably 4th grade, but this was different. I remember telling myself, I must write everything down. I must capture my emotions in this moment because I'll forget. And I didn't want to forget. Intrinsically, I knew that I would want this information later. It was something that I would want to return to. And I did, because then in 2021, I used a lot of that to inform my memoir, to go back, because I had indeed forgotten the visceral emotion, because grief doesn't go away. It is a process, not a destination. However, you may have heard that we grow around it. It doesn't go away. It doesn't get smaller. We just learn to live with it. And that's what happened. And so the visceral stuff I forgot. So it was good to go back and remember exactly what I had gone through, because that made being empathetic to people who had suffered a significant loss that much easier to express.
Yeah, and I want to slow down for a couple of minutes. The journaling piece, as I said to you earlier, I wrote a whole dissertation on writing through grief, loss, and trauma. And so I think it has that dual benefit. One is capturing the memories, that because in grief, we are fog brain. People will often say, I don't even remember the first 4 months. And it's really true. And even when my brother died over in Hong Kong, I literally brought my computer to Hong Kong because I knew that I would not remember everything that happened, which also informed my memoir as well. And I'm saying this to our listeners because even if you don't plan on writing a book about your grief, journaling does have that dual benefit of being able to remember and also helping you process the tsunami of emotions that run through our bodies when we have this tremendous loss. I want to ask you though, Michelle, is your mom still alive, or has your mother passed as well?
She is. She's significantly younger than my father, so she's in her 70s. So
She's in her
she's still alive and she's with me. Mhm. Yeah.
Okay. And so then of course it's always being strong for the parent too. So I would love for you to talk about that, because as the daughter do you have siblings?
I do. I have two younger sisters. So I am the oldest,
Okay, you're the
the
oldest.
the pillar.
Yeah, the pillar of strength. So, because I talk about this a lot with siblings, that when a sibling dies, the surviving siblings need to be really strong, right, for the parents. Tell us what the experience has been like for you when your dad died, and now also being there for your mom. What has that experience been like?
Well, that's a loaded question.
I
And
know.
I'm sure your listeners can empathize, because it really depends. And everybody's experience is going to be different depending on your family of origin and how dysfunctional it is. So I will say this: there is definitely some truth to the fact that I am the oldest, that I'm considered even by my younger sisters to be the responsible one. And how do I say this? So when somebody passes away, there are so many secondary losses that occur. Like, I not only lost my father, I lost the buffer between my mother and I. I lost his presence, which I did not realize until after he was gone, just how big his personality was. He was a very quiet man. He didn't talk a lot. When you did get him started on a subject, then he would talk your leg off. But for the most part, he was from Poland. He went through World War II as a prisoner, and just a remarkable, remarkable man. But I think that afterwards, one of the biggest losses for me was that buffer. And I had to take over. And for my personal experience, there is a little bit of an expectation that I take his place, that I try to fill that void, which I'm not going to do. I have not done, all because I've been in therapy. So, and have those boundaries. But it's very common. It's very common. The other thing I wanted to mention is, and I write about this in my book, about a year after he had passed, my mom had a medical event. She had to go to the hospital. And I remember coming home that evening. She was going to be fine, and she was fine. But I remember thinking, just being alone in the house, and my mind kind of going there, imagining, like, what if this was it? And I also lost her. And I'm getting emotional just thinking about it, because I remember sitting on my bed and thinking, is this it? Is this what it's going to be like when she's gone too? It'll just be me in this big old empty house alone. And it was a really interesting experience, because I sat with it and I held space for myself, and I just kind of worked through, like, wow, this is what I'm feeling. Just it was a really eye-opening experience. We'll put it that way.
Well, you're giving me the chills right now, because in fact I'm going to get really emotional too here in a second, because I think that I only have a few friends that have lost both their mother and their father, and the way that they have described that to me is feeling untethered in the world, like they're our anchor, right? Like, God, I'm going to start to cry, because when my mother died, my mother had a lot of health complications for many, many years, and when she died, it was this combination of a blessing and this profound loss, because I have literally talked to my mother every day since since I moved out of the house, right, when I was like 18 or 19, whenever I went to college. And my dad, who I love dearly, we had a different relationship, right? Because it's my dad. And but I often think about, I call my dad every day. Like if I have to fly, I tell my dad about my flights. I'm like, and it's just this feeling of, my girlfriend said when her second parent, when she lost both of her parents, she felt like this orphan in the world, even though we're these adults. But I got it to this degree of, even my husband doesn't worry about me the way my dad does, and it's that I hear what you're saying. And we're at that age where, God, I can't even think about my father leaving the world. Like it's too much. And I don't know that any of us can really understand what that means when both of our parents are gone. Who are we when our parents aren't here anymore? It's such a weird thing, because we're these full-blown adults that have been adults for a long time. Anyway, sorry, I just started to stuff that
No,
I've been
it's
thinking
so
about.
true. In fact, in my memoir, it's interspersed with poetry that I wrote. I've always written poetry, but it was kind of a grief practice that I used to process some of the really big emotions that prose just didn't cut it. I had to use poetry. And I just recently wrote one where I talk about that
Can we hear it? Do you have it?
I'm not quite ready to, to
Okay.
share that.
Okay.
But
I
I will
love
say
when
this.
people share their work.
I talk about how, especially for my father, I don't know if you felt this way about your mother, but just his presence, I liken him. I know you mentioned, kind of an anchor, but an anchor keeps you in one place. And my father was more like an aircraft carrier, strong, big, but you could fly and then come back. You could go off and do things and then you could come back. And I talk about how when he was around, I could be the adult that I am, but I could also be the child, which I think we all still carry that child within us. And it's just so true that once he was gone, I felt like, oh, I have to be the adult. I don't want to be the adult. Adulting is hard. We've all seen that meme, but it's true. Like, at this, I had been very successful. I had been responsible. And then as soon as he passed away, it was like, oh, now I'm really responsible. Like, he's not here anymore. He's not here to do or say the things that he did. I have to take over some of that, like taking care of the house. And there was a recent incident that had me just breaking down crying, where our furnace died in right before Thanksgiving of this year. And the first guy that came out to see it basically scared me into purchasing a new furnace, and really took advantage of the fact that I'm a woman. And all I could think in the moment was, if dad were here, we wouldn't be dealing with this, because he would have fixed it. We wouldn't have to get a new furnace because he would have fixed it, because that's just the type of person he was.
So your dad was a pretty healthy 94-year-old. He was still living at home. He was still very.
Yeah, he passed away at home. Yeah.
Wow.
So yeah.
Wow.
And just that, realizing even 4 years later, that secondary loss, that if he were here, I wouldn't have been taken advantage of, and we wouldn't have had to deal with this. He would have been dealing with it. And I had to put on my big girl panties and, get a second opinion, and, and finally everything, there was a happy ending to everything. But, just in that moment, I just remember going in and just all of a sudden just losing it with my mom and just crying my eyes out, being like, I don't want to do this, almost like a tantrum. And it's just interesting. And I even told myself in my mind at the time, like, well, it's been 4 years. This is not new. But it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how long it's been or how short a time it's been.
Well, and I also think, the humans in our world, whether it's our best friends or our siblings or our colleagues, people bring things to our world, right? And our parents it's, I mean, you're going to laugh, but it's Christmas time, but it's like the gift that keeps on giving, and keeps on causing grief, because it is such a massive hole that they leave when they leave. And I think that different scenarios come up where it's like, oh, there's mom or there's dad. And, and I love what you said, that an aircraft carrier, when I was thinking anchor, what that metaphor means for me is, instead of like floating off into the ethers, I feel like my parents ground me in this
Right.
way that nobody else really can ever take that place. I mean, and it's that, for those of us who are fortunate enough to have parents that created safe space for us, because certainly that is not everyone's experience, right?
Right.
Where their parents their parents can be the dangerous place. But for me, my parents were my safe landing space. And it sounds like very much that is true for you as well. And so, but you said something earlier that I want to circle back to, because I felt like it was really important, that whether it's a sibling or a parent, suddenly we feel like we have to fill that hole in some way and like become the personification of that person. Like, for example, you dealing with what is it that you just, your furnace? Geez,
The
Amaya,
furnace.
that's one of my college.
Yeah.
Like you dealing with the furnace, right? That you dealt with that instead of your mother having to deal with that. So you are filling some of those holes for your father, and you are taking on this role. And that is it, and it's that reminder of that hole that your father has left behind. And that's when, in like, early grief, we can be in this fetal position, and that grief, that those waves that can come over us can happen when we least expect it, like you buying the furnace, for example.
Yes. Yeah.
But I
And
wanted
this happens no matter how much time has passed. I have a friend who lost his
exactly.
brother years, like 20 years ago, and a song will come on the radio and he'll just lose it.
Exactly. And so I wanted to go back to what you said about boundaries, that you can't be your father for your mother, obviously.
Yeah.
But at the same time, the furnace is just the example that you gave. There are times when you actually are taking over some of the things he used to do. What is that like for you when you talk about the boundary and navigating this with your mother? It's a give and take, right? I mean, I just want to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, again, it really depends on the relationship and the personality and whether there's other issues, which that's all the case. Because like you mentioned, that your relationship with your mother it was very different from the one that you have with your father. And I think that's true of anyone, and certainly true in our household. And, throughout childhood, I was kind of, what is the word in psychology? There's a triangulation that can sometimes occur
Yeah.
between mother, father,
Parents,
and
yes,
child.
and child, yes.
That was definitely the case growing up for me. And so it makes things, well, let me say this. In addition to dealing with my grief, the way I was raised was to regulate everyone else's emotions. And now, as an adult, I've learned to kind of separate that and recognize what are mine and what are somebody else's, and that it's not my job to regulate anybody's emotions. They have to do that. And if they can't, that's on them. It's still not my responsibility. And yet, my experience has been that it can be very difficult, especially as somebody who is empathetic, to carry my grief and to watch someone else carry theirs, maybe, well, in a very different way. And of course her grief is different. One of the chapters in my memoir is about that, the fact that I lost a father but she lost a spouse. And even though grief has commonalities between, no matter what type of grief you're dealing with, there are some things that are specific to the type of loss. So spousal loss is different from parental loss, is different from sibling loss, is different from suicide loss, it's, yeah. So let me just say this. It's been a challenge, and I'm still walking that path. We
Yes.
both are, because like I said, grief is a process, it's not a destination. So yeah, every
And
day just
do you
take it day.
openly talk about the loss of your dad with your mom? Is that some, or do you try to protect each other from that? What goes on there around that elephant in the room?
And it is very much an elephant in the room. I would say we tend not to talk about it. Not like you and I are talking about it. He'll come up in conversation. She'll bring up a memory. She'll just start to cry out of the blue. Sometimes it'll be a fun thing. Some of the times it'll be like, one of the things is that, like, I'll make tacos one night for dinner, and she'll be like, "Oh yeah, Dad never liked tacos because they were messy," and I'm like, "Yeah, that's true. He didn't like to eat those, and he liked potatoes with every meal, but fries never counted. Like if you had fries, no, he wasn't going to eat those. He needed to have his boiled potatoes, things like that. So some good memories. But in general, no, we don't really talk about it. And that's
Is
not
that
necessarily healthy, but it's not necessarily wrong. So
can we sit here? Do you mind if we linger here for a moment? Because
sure.
one of the huge misnomers, because I interviewed siblings all over the world for my book, and
Mhm.
and I also carried this belief too in the early months after my brother died, that bringing up his name was just too much. I felt like if I brought it up to my parents, they'd burst into tears, and then I didn't know what to do with their discomfort. And somehow I feel like I had to take that away from, I had to protect them from that.
Right.
And yet I, on the other hand, was dying a slow death too, and I couldn't begin to express my grief around my parents. And so, and this was a very common theme with siblings, right? They're like, oh no, I don't bring up my sibling's name. Of course, that's not true
Oh.
for every family, but I remember when I started doing the grief and loss training and
Mhm.
running bereavement groups, is that obviously I'm not reminding my parents that my brother died when I bring up his name, but being able to talk about that openly, that
Mhm.
white elephant, as I was saying, is a source of healing. And I'm curious, do you intentionally not talk about your father, or is it a situation where it just doesn't come up? Like, I'm just curious if that's intentional
It's
around that
intentional on my
dynamic.
part. Yeah, it's
Okay.
intentional on my part. Yeah. Mhm. It's
And
not
is
that I
it,
don't think about him. And if other people bring him up, it's totally fine. I just intentionally don't bring it up because, for various reasons. But
okay.
yeah.
Okay. So you decided so it sounds like you're living with your mom too, right? Is
Yes.
that true?
Yep.
So that's
Yep.
even more loaded. Geez. Okay.
We could do a whole other interview just about
Well, I
that.
did. I haven't started my book on mothers and daughters, but I have done
Oh, oh well,
yeah,
I will definitely buy that.
yeah. It's because there isn't a relationship more powerful, right, in terms of the way that we are shaped as women in the world.
Mm.
Okay. So going back to what we were talking about, then I just wanted to circle back to that. Oftentimes when we feel like we've got to fill the void in some way
Mm.
for the person who has, because there's no one who's filling that void for you, right? So
Right.
how have you dealt with your grief? If you're not talking to your mom, what's the dynamic between you and your sisters? What has that been like?
We don't really talk about it either. You can see how dysfunctional we are.
I think it's the
My
land of
middle sister
grief.
lives far away. Oh,
Yeah.
sorry.
I just think it's the land of grief. I think that's why I
Yes.
love to talk about family dynamics, because I
Hmm.
think that
Hmm.
doing our grief walk is very solo, but it also, we are impacted in a million different ways within
Oh,
it.
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's why I say grief is multi-layered. I mean, there's so many things. And, I was thinking about when I mentioned that I lost that buffer. So it wasn't just the loss of my father, it was also the loss of that buffer between my mother and I. There's a great quote that I'll paraphrase from C.S. Lewis, where he talks about how in his book, The Four Loves, he's talking about the different loves, like platonic and romantic and spiritual. But he mentions that, like in friendship specifically, but I think this applies, especially when we're talking about grief. When, if I'm friends with you, Susan, and Simona. So we're going to say, since, if one of you leaves the picture, I have not only lost that, that my friendship with that specific person, I've also lost what she brings out in you. And that certainly applies even, to any relationship, those that are interconnected like that, especially in family. So when I lost my dad, I also lost what he could bring out of my sisters and what he brought out of my mother. That those are all these multi-layered losses and secondary losses that occur.
And what he brought out in you.
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
It's really powerful, actually.
This goes back to being the adult that I need to be. Like, I was able to do that when he was around. For instance, when he was alive, I moved back in 2011 to be with them because they're starting to get, much older and couldn't do certain things around the house. So I moved back to take care of things. And I remember something happened in the basement, either with the furnace or one of the breakers got flipped. And it was like midnight. In our basement, you get into it by going outside. So I was like, okay, I'm just gonna put my boots on and I'm gonna go out to the basement and fix whatever it was. I think it was probably a breaker. And all I had to do was switch it back on. Totally fine, not a problem. And my dad was like, yeah, you can do what needs to be done because you're responsible and and you're not afraid and blah blah. After he died, same thing happened. And I was like, I'm not going out there. I'm not going to go down there.
I knew you were going to say that. I'm terrified.
It's midnight. I'm not going to go out there at night. I'm going to wait until the morning. Like, what the heck? What happened? The only thing that happened was that he wasn't there anymore. And it's not like he could have come out and, saved the day. That didn't matter. And my mom has had a similar experience. We had a discussion about this because she's like, she can't stay by herself alone at night. And she's always had this issue, past trauma. And she said to me, well, I can't do that. And I said, Ma, you were able to do that when Dad was alive. She says, yeah, because he was alive. And I said, yeah, but he wouldn't have been able to, like, again, save the day because he was getting frail towards the end. She said, didn't matter. And so it's here. It's all here.
Of course. It's
very interesting to hear that.
And yes. And I know exactly what you're talking about. It's like the psychology behind it, where I've got a 20-pound dog. Okay. My dog can't do anything. He can't protect me from anyone. He can't do anything, literally nothing. He can lick you, and that is about it. And when my dog was in a kennel and he wasn't here for the night, because I was leaving the next morning, kind of a thing, I couldn't sleep. I think that what it does is highlight the power of presence. And what you just said around, it is totally the psychology, but it sounds to me like your dad believing in you was enough for you to believe in yourself, right? And that is just, it's just so profound when you think. That's what I mean by we are reminded of the whole all the time with things that come up on a day-to-day basis that we're not aware of. Are you any less brave than you were when your dad was alive? No, but there was something about his presence that you could throw your cape on and be like, I can go do this, even though your dad could not have helped you if someone came and tried to attack you. It's fascinating when you think about the power of that.
Yeah, that was another poem that I wrote about, which was, I guess it was kind of about him, but it was also about, just that, wanting that romantic partner in my life, not because I can't not because I can't save myself. I have fought my battles, I have fought monsters, and I'm perfectly capable of defending myself. But to have that person in your corner, believing in you, there's something so powerful about that, because I truly believe that each of us, even the most introverted, shy person, we are built for community, and that has been such a blessing for my own grief journey, to have a supportive system that, now mine is really amazing. Nobody has ever said you should get over it by now. They've always been supportive. They always listen. They always hold space. They love me as unconditionally as humanly possible. And to have that is so key in order to keep my sanity. I mean, and of course I also, sought out therapy after a year because I needed a little bit of extra help.
Same.
But having that
I did
peer
too.
support was amazing.
It's
And
huge.
I really give them kudos, because what often happens is you don't get it unless you've been through it. This happened to my mother, and I don't know if this is a generational thing, but she had one friend who, very, very nice, and a very nice couple. They came to the wake, they came to the funeral, but they didn't really like check in. Like they didn't call like every month or whatever. They weren't like rude. It's just, when it's not your loss, life goes on. I mean, life just goes on and you just don't think about it. She recently lost her husband, like quite suddenly, like he just didn't wake up. And my mom has called her almost, if not every day, at least once a week, just to talk, just to see how she's doing, how she's surviving, you know. And I overheard their conversation one day, and she said, this woman said, you know, thank you for calling and checking in, because other people just don't get it. And I mentioned that to my mom. I said, she didn't do that. She says, yeah, because she didn't get it. But because I'd been through it first, I knew. And that's why I do. That's why I do it. That's why I call, So.
And I think, you said a couple of things too. That you went to go see a grief therapist, and for some people it's
Yeah.
going to grief groups, or because I think it's true. I think that even if friends do get it, it's life simply moves on. It just does. They have families, they've got a job,
Yeah.
they have all of the things. And I remember that I also went to a therapist for a year. I was having an extraordinarily hard time. And because I'm a therapist, I sort of have always played that role for my friends. I'm the one my friends come to.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Yeah, no, you totally have the therapy vibe. I was wondering why you weren't a therapist, actually, but I wasn't going to say that. But yeah, and so, and I also felt like I didn't know what to do with these feelings, and there was nothing anyone could say. I didn't need anyone to take it away. I needed a place to process, and that's the difference, right? It's like, what do you need? I'm seeing a client, and she's like, I try to talk to my partner. She lost her child, and she said, I try to talk to my partner and I just never feel better. And it's because when it's like nobody can give us what we need, because what we need is the space to grieve. And grieving can look like a bunch of things. It can look like crying, it can look like talking, it can look like yelling, it can look like lots of different things. But it's that safe space to be able to do what you need to do without someone trying to fix it for us. And people who love us want to fix it because they don't want us to see us in pain. When you go to somebody, they're not attached to your outcome, right? They are offering the space for you to be there and do what you need to do.
Yes.
And you don't expect anything from them. You don't expect them to hug you and comfort you and wipe your tears away, right? It's your space to breathe. And so I say this because I think oftentimes, people are feeling so alone. I've heard this a million times. I've never felt so alone as I do when I'm grieving. And it's because you can be surrounded by people, but they don't know what to do either. Because, right? Grieving is feeling, and feeling is giving yourself the space to do so, whether that's in a group, alone in your bedroom, journaling, with a therapist. But I think that sometimes we're always like, my friends, like, where is everybody? People don't know what to do, because there really is nothing they can do. They can bring you a meal. They can do those very tangible things that are helpful. They can clean your house. They can do things that we can't do when we're shut down. but they
Yes.
cannot accelerate our grieving process.
No. And they shouldn't.
And they can't.
And
And they can't.
we
Right.
shouldn't either.
Exactly.
You just sit with it, and it's painful and it is messy and we don't like it because, as we were talking before we started the podcast, pain, we just want it to go away. We want to take a pill and make it go away. But it doesn't make it go away. It just dulls the receptors. The pain is still there. It's just hidden. And we don't do ourselves any favors when we do that. And that's why in that moment, I remember thinking that in that first week, sitting and writing in my journal and thinking, I must feel everything. I must lean in and embrace this pain because I intuitively knew that it was normal, that this was something that I needed to go through. And I was like, I'm not going to run away from this as I had run away from other painful things in the past. I was like, I'm not going to run away from this. I'm going to lean in and walk through this. And yeah. And I think that was actually very healing, even though it didn't feel that way in the beginning, but it served me well.
Yeah.
In my
And,
process.
and I just wrote about this. You can't, it doesn't matter if you try to outrun grief. It will catch up with you in some way. It will.
Yes.
It just will. It will manifest in some way. And it will
Yes.
leak out in a whole bunch of different ways, whether you become cynical and start, and it breaks
Right.
down relationships. I mean, it just does a whole bunch of not good things. And feeling it and feeling the pain grows us in unimaginable ways when we really allow ourselves to just, I call it kissing the bottom of the well, because that's what it felt like to me.
Ooh. Oh, that's a great image. And it's true because I write about this and I speak about this. For me personally, I had some walls built up, which is it's all part of the messy part of regrets and all this kind of stuff. But the grief and losing my father exploded that wall. It just in an instant, everything just crumbled and it broke my heart wide open.
Yeah.
In this, and it was a different than other types of heartbreak that I have experienced. And it was just really, it's a tough thing to go through, but I really gained some stuff, some healthy things from that.
Like what? Can you share with us, if it's not too intimate, just maybe an enlightened moment that you've had or what changed as a result?
More willingness to be vulnerable. Because prior to that, like I said, I'd built up some walls. I did not want to be vulnerable. I did not want to hurt again. I realized I am going to experience pain no matter what. Why not make it count for something? Why not use it for fuel? Why not learn something? And that's not to say that every pain that we go through, that it happens for a reason, or that we're supposed to learn something from it. I mean, you can, but that is your choice. You have to make that choice. Nobody can make it for you, and nobody should tell you that, oh, well, some of the cliches that people use are just really painful and hurtful. That, well, there was a reason that he died. Really? But you're gonna say that to some, when something tragic happens and somebody like dies way too young. No, that's not up to you to find that. That is up to the person who is going through the grief. If they wish to sit with that and they find something from that, that is amazing. But if they don't, that's okay. That's their grief process. Somebody said this, I don't know who it was, but I've adopted it because it makes so much sense, that our personal grief process is so personal. It is almost like a fingerprint. Nobody can tell you what yours will look like, whether it's if there's a right way, because there isn't. Everybody, like you said earlier, everybody grieves in a different way. Some people get angry. Anger is part of grief. It's part of it. I have felt it. I have felt angry that he left. I felt angry that he didn't do certain things before he left. And now I'm stuck with him. And to be able to just say that. And that's one of the ways that I cope in my grieving process is I have a little studio apart from the house, and I go in there and I, practice my yoga, and I sit there and I talk to him. And sometimes it'll be like, oh, I'm so angry at you. I can't believe you didn't do X, Y, and Z. And now I'm stuck and I have to do X, Y, and Z. And I don't want to do X, Y, and Z. Or I'm not capable of doing X, Y, and Z. So now I got to hire somebody to do X, Y, Z. And that vulnerability, that willingness to take responsibility for my emotions, all of them, and to step out and do things like, for instance, this podcast. If you had told me a year ago that I would be going out in public and talking about these, intimate and painful things, I'd have been like, oh, I would never do that. I have severe stage fright. I don't like to talk about stuff like that. I don't want to come on and say, talk about how things are terrible or how painful things are or something that I messed up on. And now I'm like, bring it on. Let's talk about it, because it needs to be normalized.
And that's the strength, though, when we talk about breaking our heart wide open. This is the
Yes.
transformation and the growth, that when you have, and like I said, I use the metaphor of kissing the bottom of the well, because it's so dark and so terrifying. And that when you've made that journey and you come back and feel light on your face again, you know that you can survive anything. And there is nothing that and also there is no bullshit anymore. Excuse me, listeners, for my language, but when I meet, and I feel like I've always been this way as a empath therapist, but for me, there's even less tolerance for the superfluous. It's knowing each other's heart. Let's get down to it. I don't care what title you carry in your professional world. It literally does not matter to me. And I want to know your heart. I want to know what matters to you. I want to know what lights you up. I want to know those things. That's the conversation I want to have with you, not how you're in a fight with your sister because she refused to steam broccoli on Christmas Day. Like, I don't, you know what I mean? Like some of the things that we can get caught up in. I don't care.
Now I'm wondering if somebody actually said that to you.
I want to, I don't know, I'm going to go off on a tangent here for a moment, but my little niece, she's 5, and she had this colossal meltdown on Christmas Day after she opened all of her gifts. And so I have this 9-second rule. We have to hug for 9 seconds because it's when our hearts can talk to each other, right? Because we can feel each other, right? Heart to heart, we're in the moment and we're feeling each other's love. It's the language of the heart. So we do this and she calms down and it's all good. And she looks at me and I pull her and I said, do you feel better? Nope. She breaks right back into tears again and says, but I want to reopen my gifts. And so what she was sad about was that the thrill of opening the gift, right? That was what was exciting to her. And for me, the thrill of being with a human being is opening the gift of the heart. Talk to me from the heart space. We get so caught up in our ego, and that is what causes such deep pain. All of these things we think we're supposed to be out in the world, things that we should be, people, and when we suffer deep loss and our heart breaks wide open, there is no going back to that. There's no going back.
Yeah.
And when I was with my little niece and she was crying over the gifts, it was just this moment of, I don't know, just what matters most is the gift of each other's heart. That is what matters most in this world. And we get so tripped up on these other things that don't matter. And these moments with the people that we love are what matter the most. It's all we really have. That's it. Because they will not be here forever.
Right. Nobody has yet found the cure for death. And thank God, because wow, I mean, but yeah, and it's,
What are your spiritual beliefs? Do you believe that the spirit lives on?
oh yes, very much so.
Yeah, me
Um,
too.
where it goes after, who knows? But I have felt my father, and I believe that he is still watching out for us. Um,
100%.
I had this experience of hearing him call my name the week that he died.
Wow.
Clear as day, clear as you speaking to me right now. I was lying in bed and I heard him specifically call out my nickname, and I jumped out of bed and I ran to the top of the stairs to go down, and that's when I was like, oh, he's that's impossible. He's not here anymore.
I'll tell you, I believe in it
Oh,
wholeheartedly. When I was writing my book, I I felt my brother. I felt my brother behind me. And I'll never forget when I went to go to see a medium. I love mediums. Everybody, all my listeners know how much I love mediums. I went to this medium and she said, oh, your brother's helping you write a book. First of all, I never mentioned anything to her about a book, that I was a writer, nothing. And one day I heard my brother say, Sue, and he would call me Sue, not Susan. And I heard it, just like you said. I turned around. It was the most wild experience. Although I don't know if this is what it was like for you, but I heard it in my head. Like I knew no one was in the room. I can't explain it. I could hear it and I knew it was inside my head. Do you know what I'm trying to say? I'm not explaining it very well, but it was
no,
loud. It
I
was
totally
so
understand. I understand what you're saying, but for me, it was actually like outside of me.
wow.
I didn't, it was not in my head. That's what was odd. It was not in my head. It was like coming from down the hall downstairs. I thought it sounded like him calling my name from downstairs. How
But
it would
you
have
knew
been.
he wasn't there though, right?
Oh, in the
when
moment, no, in the moment, I forgot. Like it, but that's what happens.
yeah, yeah,
And that the
definitely.
first that because it was in the first few days, and so I mean, I still have moments where I'm like, it happened to somebody else. It didn't happen to me, and he's gonna walk through
Yes.
the door,
Yeah, yeah.
which is terrible because then because in the second that you remember, you're like, oh, I just lost him all over again. But no, this was like, whether it was an audio hallucination, I don't know. All I'm gonna say is I heard him call me from downstairs, and I got up to go answer the call, and I got to the top of the stairs, and that's when it hit me that, oh, it's not possible that he could have called me because he's not here. He's
So
not.
powerful.
Yeah.
I'm just noticing the time. This always happens. This has been such a lovely conversation,
Oh,
and I
yeah,
just want to thank
same.
you for sharing so openly with us. But I want to know, because it sounds like since your dad's death, you talked about that you have really opened up and you've become much more vulnerable and you can
Right.
share your experience. Obviously, you wrote a whole memoir to share with the world. And I know the courage it takes to put a book out into the world, and your heart is literally on the page.
Yes.
How has it impacted your idea of self-love? What is self-love? It's always the question I end with. What does it mean to you now, this idea of self-love?
Oh, first of all, I just want to say thank you for having me. I feel so blessed to have met you. And
Same.
I love these deep kind of vulnerable conversations. So, oh boy, so self-love. This is again, this is a tough question. There's multi layers here. I am still walking through that idea of loving myself. I still have old hangups. I still go to therapy. I still do neurofeedback. I still do all these things to sweep out the cobwebs from childhood, from different traumas, whether major or mini. And I will say this, however, and specifically, I can say not just because of the grief process alone, but because I took that experience, and I knew that I needed to share it, that I needed to hold space for others. And I did that specifically on Clubhouse in 21. And I'll share this experience with you and your listeners. So I ran a grief space room on Clubhouse for, it was a weekly for several months. And there was 1 week where I just wasn't feeling it. I either needed to take a break or was starting to doubt myself whether anybody really wanted to hear what I had to say about grief, because grief is a very uncomfortable conversation sometimes, and people don't like uncomfortable conversations. And also, it can be very triggering when you're walking the path. So 1 week, I canceled my room. I didn't have it. And the next day, I went into another grief space, because I love supporting my fellow grief space people. I support them, and I also want to see how they're dealing with it, how they're holding space for people. So I went in this grief space room, and a woman came in and said, "Oh, I'm so glad that I found you. I'm so glad that you have this room. Last night I was looking for a room like this because I was having a crisis and I just needed somebody to be there just to listen. And I didn't find anything on Clubhouse." And I'm sitting there and I'm listening, and I'm like, oh my God, she was looking for a room. She was looking for somebody to hold space the same time that I would have had my grief room, but I canceled it. And it was in that moment that I realized, oh, I have a voice, and it matters, and I have a purpose, and it matters. I have worth. I am meant to be doing this. Oh, this is something I need to do. And that's to share my broken, open heart with others. And that really was a huge leap toward self-love. There are definitely parts of me that I'm like, yes, this is great. And I offer all this. And of course, there are still parts of my shadow self that I wrestle with. So I don't know if that answers the question.
I love that so much, because one of my favorite quotes that I'm totally going to botch, and I actually don't remember the author who wrote it either. It was not me, but it was something like, I hope my heart breaks open wide enough for the whole world to fall through. And it's so stunning and so beautiful that I just, enough said, right? I mean, it's just a very powerful quote. That's not exactly it. And I think it might have been Gregory Doyle who wrote it. He wrote Tattoos on the Heart.
Yeah.
Do you know who that is? Have you heard of him?
Yes, I do know who that is. Yes.
So wonderful.
I wrote down this quote so I can Google it later.
Go Google it. I think that's who wrote it. But anyways, I know we've got to wind down. So tell people where they can find you. And we'll also have this in the show notes.
Yes. Well, the best place is to go to my website, www.thegriefcurator.com. You can sign up for my newsletter there. You can, I'm going to be launching my blog in 2023. I just finished a program called the HELP, HELP, the Holiday Encouraging Letter Program. So that's closed for, of course, this year, but it was a great success. So I think I'm going to do it again next year. And that's, because the holidays are so difficult for so many of us. And so I sent out a few letters of encouragement, like handwritten letters to people, no matter what holiday you celebrate. So I think I'm going to do that again next year. And I'm just going to be launching some things in 23. So go ahead, and if you're interested, if you're going through a tough time, go ahead and sign up for my newsletter. I'm getting ready to put out another one. I send about once a month, and I keep you informed about all the stuff that's going on. And I highlight people like you, Susan, for things like this on my website. So that is the best place to find me. And of course, if you are on Clubhouse, or even if you're not, you can still listen on the web. I'm going to be hosting my weekly rooms again in 2023. So looking forward to meeting up with everybody out there.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much for being here today. I'm very grateful for this conversation. And thank you to all of my listeners. You know how much I love you guys. And from my heart to yours, thank you for being here. And as always, I hope that whether you are grieving or trying to support somebody who is, that you have gained a little nugget or hope or some inspiration and some hope from this conversation today. So thank you. We'll see you guys here next week. Bye for now.
Thank you. Thank you.